But if there are funding requirements and you don't match the funds with your long-term plans, then you're only theorizing, in my opinion. That has been a major problem. Inadequate framework for sustainable funding of the education sector. I mean, related to exactly what I said now. Today, I am privileged to be Executive Secretary of TETFund. This is an agency that came into being following an agreement between federal government and ASU in 1992. And by 1993, it came into being as law, establishing education tax fund at that time. And by 1998, it was adjusted to be trust fund. And in 2011, 4 years back, it became tertiary education trust fund, going back to the original concept, why it was established. And the idea was that consistently, almost all the strike action by academic staff union, it had to do with what it was described as neglect, disregard of the education sector. And for the tertiary education sector, we said, I remember that time it was said, universities had become glorified secondary schools. And it had to do with inadequate infrastructure. They almost literally suddenly almost disappeared. Conditions of service were going down. And the best of brains coinciding with the brain drain time. Our best medical doctors, our best engineers, our best professors were living in droves this country to go to other places. That was very clear that it was symptomatic of fallen standards. And of course, the follow-up was that it showed. Talking about inadequate infrastructure, environment. I mean, at some point in time, during our time, we had very good hostel environment, accommodation in the campuses. And feeding, we were given what was 3-course meals. And suddenly, these things disappeared. And we just see it as inadequate planning, matching resources with the expansion. More schools were coming up, more universities were being established, polytechnics were being established, college of education were being established. But appropriate resources were not being put there. So it got to a stage, and as it is now, a number of places, majority of the students do not have hostel accommodation. They have to live in the town to come for lectures. And you know that it's not the same. I mean, you can't compare somebody living conveniently in the campus and one that has to, you know, in between, you could even have an accident, whether it is an Okada or whatever. You better imagine. These are some of the problems. The other one is inadequate incentives and reward system for our teachers, gifted students, and our very best. I can tell you, you could not expect the teacher to be proud of himself if he's relegated in society. When I talked about the headmaster in the village at the time, we knew. It's because the teacher is no more taken serious. In fact, as it is now, almost all the practices now tend to relegate the teacher and the teaching profession and those associated with it. I'm very happy to, at this point, to say that suddenly the government of President Buhari recognizes this. The APC-led government, in its manifesto, has articulated plans to want to revive, inject incentives for the teacher, for students. For the teacher, for instance, I think I imagine that very soon, you watch out, government is going to reel out comprehensive packages and to restore dignity for the teacher from the primary school as it is right now. In fact, the worst segment of the teachers are those at the primary and secondary school level. And we need to reverse that. For the students, definitely all the facilities, all those, including, for instance, the feeding program being planned by government and as encapsulated in the APC manifesto. We are expecting that very soon some detail will emerge by way of the way government wants to proceed. And it has been experimented in a number of states in this country where feeding program has been introduced and enrollment rate has significantly improved. So it's possible to reverse the standard of education if the students are not concentrated, if the teacher is not concentrated. You can't get anything from the teacher, you can't get much from the student. Naturally and logically, standards will fall. Undue premium placed on certificates and titles. It's one of the main factors that is responsible for fallen standards. In this country, I mean, if a parent would want to go and induce an examination manager, examination officer, or a teacher to give grade to undeserving or undeserved grade to a pupil or a ward, you better imagine what that means. All you want is the candidate to have certificate. And not just at that level, not only primary, secondary. Unfortunately, this thing has gone up to the higher level, in fact, up to PhDs. There are a number of sad practices in tertiary institution, university, polytechnic, and college education that suggest people want to cut corners to get the certificates. You come, want to clap for them because they have titles. We cannot celebrate titles. We should be celebrating knowledge. And unless we correct that, our standards will continue to go down. Corruption associated with JAM, WAEC, which I mentioned earlier, I believe that all of these things need to be corrected, and I know that there are efforts by government, and they remember that there's a law. And there's a law put in place to punish examination malpractice, those that engage in it. And if these things are implemented to the letter, it will go a long way in strengthening standards and quality of education. But let me say something that concerns, finally, the last point. The media has an important role. Out there, I must say this, that I have watched some home videos in this country where you see very bad English construction permitted on our screens. I feel very bad. I feel sad about it. And I believe there are regulatory agencies, whether it's a broadcast commission, whatever, they need to get that message. Because if it's very bad English, because people are in a hurry to reel out those things because they have market for it. But if we are destroying the ability of our children for numeracy, for communication, language, English is the official language. If somebody puts bad English, and because you want money, you don't edit it, you send it out there, and this is what our children outside sitting room there in the home, they are lock themselves out, and they are watching those kind of things with very poor English. I think it's unacceptable. Something needs to be done. The same way, the other aspect is publishing. We need to continue to improve on publishing quality. And I know that from TETFund, I know what we've done. We just recently commissioned some 2 academic publishing centers. We want to restore reading and writing culture, which very sadly has diminished. And you can't have people wanting to read and write. And those that regulatory agencies, and I believe you, the media, including newspapers. I've seen sometimes, I mean, we have fantastic newspaper operators in this country, fantastic newspapers. But there are some of the moments when you see some articles, some stories, you know that somebody somewhere was in a hurry, he allowed a story with very bad English. And if some of our children read those things, I don't think it helps us. So these are some of the areas that I believe we need to do to reverse the slide in the standard and quality of education.
Yeah, the challenges are quite enormous, and so many things must be done to revive the education sector. And that takes me back to that the issue of school feeding program that is being proposed by the government. Is that what we need at the moment when we have infrastructure deficit and all other issues? We have inadequate teachers and all that. Is that appropriate for now? Should we be talking about school feeding?
Thank you very much. I like, and I'm glad to respond quickly. Yes, you are addressing the key operator challenges. The problem of the teacher, the problem of the student. If you do that, you are looking at what the teacher needs, whether it is salary, whether it is improved remuneration, working environment, office, laboratories, call it. Capacity building, on-the-job capacity building, pre-engagement capacity building, and whatever, which are some of the things being addressed, including what we do, for instance, at TETFund, providing academic staff training for MSc, PhD, university, polytechnic, and college of education. And government now, now, personally, I would tell you that the most glaring problem and more disturbing is the one that we have at the basic level that government is genuinely concerned about. And it's not only federal government, as you would appreciate. The states have a stake. I mean, they have to work together with the federal government to address the issue of the teacher It's very, very important, and I think government has got it absolutely right. Talking about capacity of the teacher, it's all part of it. It's not just welfare. Capacity, the training, I mean, which are a very comprehensive policy position is likely to emerge soon. And if that is done, it's likely to guide the years ahead. But in terms of the feeding, government is very right, because I said something. I don't know if you missed that point. I said there have been experimentations, or indeed some states are ongoing feeding program. And there is a positive correlation between funding made for feeding program and increased enrollment. And you know that enrollment, that there are segments of this country, some particular states, that have very serious challenge of even convincing parents to come back, I mean, bring their children to school. And if, for instance, addressing the issue of feeding, that becomes a tantalizing incentive, so be it. I mean, that's the way I see it. And there are other things. Remember the recent TSA, this thing? Yes. There are a number of, the plan for, is it 5,000? I'm told it's likely to take off in 2016. 5,000 for social security for a certain category of disadvantaged, yes, in society. And that government said there will be conditions. And one of the conditions, quickly, to tell you the extent to which government is considering improving education in the context of the student as well as the teacher, the pupils, is to say, look, parents, it must be, part of the condition is that parents must commit their children, they must ensure enrollment of their children in school for them to benefit from those things. To me, any additional incentives that will improve enrollment, improve, I mean, minimize truancy in school and all that. I think government, I believe, has honestly got it right. It's an appropriate priority at this time in our history.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the fact that we don't just need the enrollment, but quality output.
Yeah, well, if you say quality output, what are we talking about? You start from, for instance, from the teacher. That is it. And this is what I said. The incentives are there, are being planned. Yeah. And there are a number of things. You see, let me not preempt what is likely to come. So I will ask you to hold your guns. By the time you see the detail, you would know that government may be even thinking beyond you.
Okay, so let's talk about funding of institutions in Nigeria. TET Fund used to be Education Trust Fund, and now it's been narrowed down to Tertiary Education Trust Fund. How do we explain that? Why is it now just channeled to tertiary education?
Yes, that was the original concept. Okay. It's like going back to the original drawing board. That was the idea. Like I said, ETF came into being in 1993 after the agreement signed between federal government and ASU in 1992. And it became, the ETF and the TET Fund now, it has been and is still a 2% disposable interest from companies that make profits in this country, and it's collected by Federal Inland Revenue Service by the law of ETF at that time and now TET Fund. And that 2% money collected is deposited in central bank and remitted to TET Fund and ETF as it was before. And the idea was that when the funds of ETF was being applied across the entire firmament of the education sector, and that meant from basic level up to tertiary, it was like almost anybody that is associated with education would benefit. But then there are some of the agencies that their sources of funding is already prescribed by their law. So why did they have to benefit from that of ETF? So they said, okay, now let us refocus to the original idea. This thing should be for tertiary institutions. And that is how the name now changed to Tertiary Education Trust Fund. So it was like a refocus going back to the original idea. And let me say this, the wisdom behind that refocus has yielded dividends. And that is why 4 years down the line, for instance, with the emergence of ETF, and remember, about 3 years earlier, academic staff training commenced. And by 2011, other additional content components, including journal support, research support, and so on, came into being. You can see now that in terms of infrastructural development, it is very, very clear. I mean, just linking it to the question you had asked earlier, you said, well, could it be infrastructure? Yes, you need the infrastructure because, I mean, the very best person cannot go and stand there under the shade of the tree to, I mean, transmit knowledge. He needs a convenient environment with ICT facilities and all those things because we are in a global village now. So that is necessary. And very clearly, over the last 4 years, there has been manifest emergence of physical infrastructure which are very important. I mean, a number of these, because if you say you are not providing, I mean, classrooms, laboratories, standard libraries with soft and hardware as relevant, you are not providing ICT facilities to make people access research facilities, publish material, then we're not competing. But at the same time, you are improving the capacity. So the infrastructure, yes, as well as the human capacity is equally being improved.
So how do you go about funding different projects in various tertiary institutions? What I mean is, how do you share the funds among various institutions we have in the country?
Thank you for that question. Our law prescribes that half of the money is for the universities. Okay. The remaining half split between them at 25% each. So 50% for universities, the remaining 50%, 25 split equally between polytechnics, public polytechnics and public colleges of education. And when we say public, that's both federal and state. And that has been done over the period. There are some other details that time will not permit me here to go into, but with different categories of intervention funds, besides some of those that I mentioned, research, library, I mean, journals, book development, manuscript development, academic staff training. We have the major types of infrastructure projects like high impact projects, special projects, as well as what we used to call normal, that we now call annual projects that are given out to the institutions. And if you go out today in our public tertiary institutions, if you went to any of our public tertiary institutions some few years ago and you go today, you will notice that there is a difference. There has been more manifest appearance of TED fund intervention in our public tertiary institutions than we ever had at any time in recent decades.
Okay, outside the sharing formula that has been laid down, 50% to the universities and the 25% being shared among the other institutions, I'm talking about projects in various universities. How have you been able to manage this fund so that TED fund won't be accused of favoritism for some universities against others, or for some institutions against others?
Our law prescribes that there is equality between the zones in applying our funds. Okay. We are conscious of that. But then there is also a provision for discretionary application of funds to address some peculiarities. For instance, I can tell you we had peculiarities at some point in the Niger Delta, and some in other zones. And you will agree with me that with a number of these things have had to be reviewed and discretion by the Board of Trustees to approve some projects in particular zones. For instance, you will agree with me that there will be some sense of justification if there is a special presidential intervention project, for instance, in the Northeast, just as we've had in the Niger Delta, we've had in the Southwest and Southeast, in peculiar cases. There is a discretionary clause under the law of TED Fund that permits that to be done. But by and large, let me say this, we have always emphasized that there has been the issue of very poor or low accessing of our funds by some of the institutions. And we've sat with them and we reminded them of the need to accelerate accessing of our funds so that we do not have funds that are not utilized when there is need for it. And the challenges are out there. So I can tell you, well, sometimes you notice there could be differential between institutions, even in implementing, for instance, high impact, special projects, annual projects, etc. That is beyond TED Fund to control. We've talked to the institutions and we believe that they will continue to appreciate the points we are making.
What should be responsible for this? Is it lack of awareness or what?
Well, sometimes it also has to do with capacity. And I know I've taken time. In some cases, I talked to some of the heads of institutions and I said to them, please check your system. At TED Fund, we compare institutions. And there are times when we notice that it has to do with maybe the implementation mechanism and capacity to cope with the pace required as prescribed by TED Fund by some institutions. And for fiscal projects, you would agree that the onus rests largely around the Office of the Director of Fiscal Planning. Most of the fiscal projects, they are controlled from there. And if that is the case, then if there is something wrong in that, I have taken time to speak with some of the heads of institutions, whether vice chancellors, rectors, or provosts. And I've told them to please check where some of the challenges arise, because it is our desire that an institution is not left behind because of one mistake, as it were.
How is the TED Fund intervening in the areas of science and technology, which is very key for the nation's development?
Thank you very much. Let me say this, that largely in terms of, you are now talking about specific areas. We are guided largely by the regulatory agencies, and that being NUC for universities, NBTE for polytechnics, and NCCE for colleges of education, and as well as the institutions. Then at TED Fund also, we also have what we consider our priorities. So we try to reconcile those priorities as articulated by the regulatory agency, by the institutions, and what are our own policies reviewed from time to time, so that at the end we are on the same page. That is what determines it. So in terms of research, I can tell you today, from last year, TED Fund, in appreciating the weakness in research in our university system. Sadly, that is the reality, that there has been too much emphasis on teaching to the detriment of research in Nigerian universities. In order to correct that, we initiated and created a department of R&D, research and development, in TED Fund, and we've also decided we are putting money and liaising with our tertiary institutions to ensure that they create R&D units. Because if you just publish or you perish, as we jokingly say, you are not helping. But if it's fundamental research that solves problems of the community, of the state, of the zone, of the nation, then you now know we are advancing. So the R&D program, which we've started, we are looking at it beyond the tertiary institutions. We want to see more problem-solving research than just harvesting research and clapping for people. At the end, they are not addressing real problems of society or the economy.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your thoughts with us on the program today. We have a lot to talk about: education, development, conflict resolution, and all that, but we must go at this moment. The program has been late edition, and the guest in the house, Professor Suleiman Bogoro, the Executive Secretary of Tertiary Education Trust Fund. We've been talking about development issues, conflict resolution, educational system in the country, and how the country can indeed move forward. My name is Shikiola Ikpenaye, hoping you join me next time on the program.